Hey everyone, and welcome to today's edition of SIG Node. It is Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. I can't believe it's November. We've got a short agenda for today, in some part probably due to the fact that the file went read-only. We're very sorry for that. The Google account that it was stored on ran out of disk space briefly, so it's editable now. We figured it out, no cause for alarm. Sergey could not make it to the meeting today, so we don't have the table of what's going on with various pull requests, but I did take a look at the total number of active pull requests, and we're up a few. I think that people have been somewhat resource constrained, but I know from last meeting's review, it looked like we had done pretty well in terms of our sort of soft code freeze and making sure that beta stuff got merged. So that was good. I have one announcement before we jump into the agenda, which is that code freeze is in 2 weeks from now. It's sneaking up on us. So we probably want to make sure that alpha stuff is getting reviewed and that we're getting feedback in and whatnot. So I'm certainly going to try to prioritize some time on that this week. Other reviewers, a heads up to you as well. And for authors, please make sure that your thing is reviewable. It's not marked work in progress. Everything that needs to be there is there. And if you need to ping reviewers, please do so into the PR reviews channel on the Kubernetes Slack. Any other announcements before I dive into today's agenda?
Yeah, if you're eligible, please vote for the steering committee elections too. That the polls close on 2 days.
Oh yeah, that's a great announcement. So if you haven't voted yet in the election this year, they are not sending out individual emails. You have to go and actually click on the link, which was sent to the dev mailing list. So I'll add a link to that to the agenda. Thanks for the reminder, Mark.
No problem. I added a link. It's elections.kates.io.
Awesome. And you should be eligible if you have more than 50 dev stats in the past year, or if you applied for an exception, but I think exceptions have closed. So, okay, moving right on into the agenda. Our first item is from username Rada, username spaces cap. Take it away.
Yeah. Hello. Do you hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you, Rodrigo.
Ah, cool, because my audio was not working a few minutes ago. Great. So yeah, we opened a CAP long ago, and we received a lot of ideas, and yeah, I created a new proposal that incorporated almost all the feedback from the previous discussions, and I created some slides that I couldn't add to the agenda because it was read-only, but I can maybe share the screen with you and I have like 3-4 slides to show the high-level idea of the proposal.
Sure, I have given you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, let me see. So share screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Ah, great. So as I was saying, we started a CAP long ago, like about a year ago. And there was a lot of very valuable discussions, and we created a new proposal that mentioned in a GitHub comment in that PR that incorporates all this feedback. And I wanted to share this in the next slides and coordinate what are the next steps to iterate this idea or to agree or see how to continue with this. So going straight to the proposal, I have also some slides, if you prefer, about what are user namespaces and why they are important or some other background. If you want, I can jump to them. Let me know and interrupt me whenever you want. But basically, the idea is adding two fields to the pod spec. One field is, all the names are preliminary, of course, but one field would be about using user namespaces, yes or no, like a bool. And another field will be to improve pod-to-pod isolation. And this will make sense in the next slides on why we have these two fields. And the idea is that, yeah, the work is divided in 3 phases, and each phase either increases the isolation that pods have with user namespaces, or more workloads can use user namespaces. So basically, we have, for example, phase 1, that it's basically user namespaces support for pods without volume, and I want to emphasize the without, because pods that have volumes but don't share it with anyone else, like an empty dir or a config map secret downwards API or projected, can use it. And the user namespace will have a mapping to user IDs in the host. And this mapping will not overlap with any other pod. So this will give us more isolation between pods.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
In the past release, we added support for running in rootless mode. Does that already cover phase 1, pods without volumes?
No. It's user namespaces support, but at a different level. With rootless, you usually run like the kubelet runs inside a user namespace. And this proposal is not about running the kubelet inside a user namespace, but the containers that the kubelet creates through the container runtime interface are run inside a user namespace.
I see. Would we not want both in order to get the advantages of not running kubelet with elevated permissions?
Yeah, both
So
could be combined.
I would say that we will probably need to keep those two separate, like solving the whole Kubernetes control plane to be rootless is a way different and way harder problem than running the workloads with user namespaces. And I think that itself has 3 phases, and rootless is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, the reason that I asked Mernal is because there are a bunch of CVEs cited on the comments in the KEP, which it's unclear to me if the issue is specific to the workloads being privileged or if the components being privileged are the issue. There's a little bit of like fluffiness there. So mostly I want to make sure that we're trying to solve like the right thing and we're not necessarily like mixing the two.
Yeah, so the kubelet needs to be able to start pods that require a root on the host. So when we explored running rootless kubelet, you were already running a subset of valid pod specs. So I agree with Mernal that this is distinct. But yeah, good question to at least clarify then that like a rootless kubelet would not be able to execute a pod that requested the host user namespace, well, or at least if the runtime it interacted with wasn't rootless.
Awesome, thanks.
Okay, so phase 1 will be, yeah, all the phases is creating a user namespace that the pod will use. Yeah, phase 1 the idea is to support pods without volumes, because in pods when you don't share files, you can use different mappings for the user namespace that do not overlap with other pods, and you have more isolation. And as you don't have to share files, you can do that. And of course, this doesn't work for all the workloads. It only works for workloads that don't use volumes, but mitigates all the known vulnerabilities. I have a list in the next slides of these vulnerabilities. And the phase.
Just as a pause there, Rodrigo.
Yes.
I like this phase 1, honestly. I don't know, Renal or anyone else want to talk about, like, we had a similar capability in Cryo itself that allowed you to run the pod rootless if you knew you didn't need volumes, but it was tied to a runtime class behavior. It was largely used for build use cases. Did you have a particular use case that you thought phase 1 best worked with as well? Just, I assume it's any transactional web app.
Not a particular use case, but we have like a lot of pods with only this kind of volumes. and having a good level of isolation for them, it's nice. Because yeah, we have a lot of web applications and things like that that access a shared database and they don't have a state per se on the pods, only the database and that stuff. And yeah, I think also this phase one was something that was mentioned in the GitHub discussion, but also what you said about the cryo annotation. It's something that Giuseppe, that I think joined this meeting too, hopefully, also mentioned recently, like 2 days ago in the GitHub PR.
Yeah, I think Giuseppe's here. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, these phases do not incorporate the cryo learnings that Giuseppe shared in any way, because I think the comment was scarce for me to understand what he said, but we can definitely try to improve it. But yeah, basically phase one would be pods without volumes, and phase two would allow more workloads. And it will be basically very similar to phase one, just that when the pod has a different kind of volumes, it will return the same mapping for all the pods with volumes. And this is not ideal because the mappings overlap, but you can share files very easily. And if we are going to have phase one, then phase two is like a no-brainer, and also like mitigates all the vulnerabilities. So I think it's...
So Rodrigo, I think one thing that may help here is like, are we proposing like who is picking the mappings? So maybe we can add like clarity around that, the detail, like kubelet is picking the mapping. How are we ensuring they are distinct? Are we depending on the runtime to pick it and return it back to the kubelet? And phase two also, like, how are the volumes actually going to work? Are we depending on ID mapped mounts?
No. No. So yes, very good question. The mappings in this proposal are picked by the kubelet, so the kubelet can easily guarantee that there are no overlapping pods, and there will be some host, some UID space reserved for the host to use. And the idea is to also this range given to the kubelet, the host can guarantee that there is no overlap with the file system, with the user IDs using the file system. And ID mapped mounts, it's something that I mentioned in the GitHub PR, but it's basically very hard. Like ID map mounts, it's very nice, but it's a specific per file system, and you need super new kernels, and it only has like X4 BTRFS and like FAT and XFS. So we'll have to deal with lot of file systems that don't support ID map mounts, or kernels that don't support ID map mounts. My idea is to later use ID map mounts for the churn that the container runtime needs to do, but overlay FS is not yet supported, so we cannot do that yet. But I think that's the first way we can start using ID map mounts, because we control the partition where the container runtime runs on the host and downloads the images. And if that partition is in a supported file system and with a new kernel, then we can remove the storage and performance overhead of using username spaces.
Actually, so I just want to point out for the container D plus gvisor use cases, then this mapping actually is done on the container runtime phase. So maybe Nantao, you can chime in. Maybe I remember correct me here. So we need to double check if this remapping is done by the Kubernetes. Maybe there's the conflict. We need to take a look at in that part. Yeah, I just want to raise this.
Sorry, I didn't follow. What is the conflict in container D if the mapping is chosen by the kubelet?
So the container runtime, I think Derek also comment here, and the mapping actually done by the container runtime. Not so right now, if Kubernetes pick up these remapping things, and so there might be conflict with the container runtime. So the both container plus the gvisor and also kata use cases, so might be conflict here. But I need because that's the couple years ago when we designed, because that time user namespace, this project haven't started yet. We are doing the user namespace to the container runtime, both for kata and also container plus gvisor use cases. So that back then. So I need to refresh my memory on those things. Yeah.
Yeah, we can look at that later. I think I mentioned in the GitHub PR, but I can mention it afterwards also.
Sure.
Why I think this should work, but we definitely need to have a look good to me from other like VM runtime containers and things like that. But yeah, coming back, phase one is pods without volume. Phase two is pods with volume. It's just a very easy twist on phase one. And phase three is pods with volumes with an interpod isolation. So you will need to use the second field that we added to this pod spec. The mapping that will expose to the container, we don't know yet because we don't have the RISC defined, but it will be less than 64,000 because when we want pod-to-pod isolation, we want to give each pod a mapping according to the namespace or service account they are in, and those are container scope, not node scope. So we need to guarantee. Yeah, so if we give 64,000 to this, we'll run into cluster limits very shortly. So we need to give something less. But yeah, the advantage is that the mapping will overlap, but only with pods in the same namespace of service accounts. So you have more isolation there. It might not work for all workloads because we need to expose a short number of user IDs to the container. And things like if we give a mapping per service account or per namespace, you won't be able to share across service accounts or namespace. Maybe it's not very used, but it's a limitation by design of this approach. It also mitigates all the vulnerabilities, and the idea, is to use some heuristics to guess which user IDs the container needs. Yeah, sorry, someone I think wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I was just trying to refresh my own memory related to phase three, which was, is there a benefit in having two containers in the same pod not share a common user namespace if both containers don't mount the same volume? I didn't know if you had thought through this, Rodrigo. I was trying to, I was thinking, well, what effectively we're saying pods by definition would share a common user namespace. Whereas today, like they don't have to share a common PID namespace. And so I was just trying to redo the mental exercise of asking, is that a definition that needs to hold true or not? Or is there a use case where folks who inject sidecar containers into pod specs that often don't use a shared volume, would they benefit from a separate user namespace or not?
We won't be able to share the other namespaces if we are not sharing the user namespace.
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So pod has to have the same user namespace for all the containers.
Yeah, maybe as a phase 4 or something like that, we can create a user namespace for the pod and then inside user namespace for different containers.
It could be a nested one. Yeah.
Yeah, nested user namespace, but
yeah.
This is,
and I'm not sure there are benefits.
Yeah, it's a tricky topic. So I was just trying to get my own mental bearings on this again as we revisit this.
Yeah, and So basically, yeah, phase one is pods without volumes. So pods with volumes that are not shared. Phase two is just a small twist over phase one. And phase three is more pod-to-pod isolation, where we try to not share the mappings unless there are some reasons that sharing might be beneficial, like sharing files or things like that between pods. But we restrict the number of workloads that can use it because we don't have any other way around it. This is the basic idea. I think, yeah, here is the list of some vulnerabilities that are not possible with any of the phases, like phase one, phase two, or phase three. That will be not applicable or completely mitigated. Like the first cross-account container takeover in the public cloud that happened on Azure would have not been possible if Kubernetes supported user namespaces, because it needed the runC breakout, the last CVE in this list. And that CVE is not possible when we're using user namespaces in a way that we're proposing here, that like we're using user namespaces, but the container that runs is not privileged. It's like zero root in the host is not mapped to the container and things like that. And there are several vulnerabilities in Kubernetes. One very recent, like about the subpath volumes. There are always vulnerabilities with subpath, and usually mitigation is to not run containers as root, because root has all the privileges on the host and can read any file and have like DAC override and those capabilities. With any of these proposals, DAC override and those capabilities, you don't have them on the host, and no user is root on the host, so they're mitigated in that regard. I think that is, yeah, that is all. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for sharing. Do we have any more questions? Because we have a few more agenda items.
Yeah, my only doubt is who should pick the range for the IDs. Like from my playing with Cryo, I see the advantage if this logic is in the runtime, because it has a better view, like on the image used for the container, so it can pick a better range than what a kubelet can do. For example, in Cryo, we expect the container image, and we pick a range that honors the ownership of the files in the image, as well as the files the users define the AC password file. So yeah, this will be my only doubt at this point, if it will make more sense to have this logic in the runtime. One issue though is that the range must be picked at pod creation time, and still it's not known what containers will be added to the pod. So at the moment, the limitation we have in Cryo is that the inspection can be done only for the pod image, which is not very helpful. But so yeah, this is one limitation I saw.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Containerd has a different behavior. So for Containerd, I remember the image download and unpack are separate. So for download, you just download the content, and for unpack, for actually creating a container, you unpack, you create a snapshot. And if I remember correctly, for each container, you have its own top-level snapshot, and you can do the UID mapping there. So if I remember correctly, for Containerd, it can be per pod and per container, and the mapping can happen at runtime when you create a container. So I just want to point out there may be a implementation difference for different runtime, and for Containerd, if I remember correctly, it might be possible to support per pod and per container mapping, like the phase 3.
I think the Containerd have to do, right? So if cannot, then how gvisor doing this one? Because gvisor actually support pod level, user namespace and the mapping those and the container within that pod. So we have to pass those things. This is why earlier I raised that
Yeah, for that one, I really don't understand. So, yeah, not don't understand. I really forget about it, the details.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So we need to follow up at least because I also remember when we proposed that for the GWAS, that's a couple of years ago. And so the kata doing the similar things, using the similar logical. And so that's why we need to figure out this is not cause the regression for the other use, right? So cryo, I think the might be the similar, but it's not exactly the same. But also we need to avoid the regression. That's the only concern I have.
I mean, you can specify the mapping to cryo, like the user can specify the mappings. So this wouldn't be like a breaking change for the implementation. It's just what makes more sense by default. Like I see the advantage of having in the runtime because it has access to more information and can inspect images. Instead of moving this information back to the kubelet, it's more expensive. I think like it will require more.
The runtime doesn't have visibility of the volumes in phase 2, right?
Nor phase 3. Yeah, I think the problem of the runtime picking, but I think it's not clear, but only relevant on, sorry, let me organize myself. I think it's not clear who should be the owner of the mapping for phase 3 because it's tricky. But it's only relevant for phase 3, right? Because for phase 1, like if we agree that we want to give parts without volumes, different mappings, we can easily do it today and we don't need much from the runtime. But when we need to know which IDs the container needs to use, we might need some more information from the runtime, but that's only needed for phase 3.
Yeah, agree.
So,
1 and 2, like with a wide enough range, it's not an issue. But when we are trying to compress that range is where we could benefit from knowing.
yeah, so, and so if there is general agreement on the idea for phase 1 and phase 2, and we can define phase 3 on the go, I think that will be super beneficial because like we did a very detailed estimate of the work needed to get phase 1 and phase 2. And it's about 6 months full-time working on that. So it's like a lot. So yeah, if we can split the phases, like if this split makes sense for everyone, I think that will be super beneficial.
Rodrigo, I think I like the 3 phases you laid out. I particularly like phase 1 if we couple that with validation areas where users were using volumes that are beyond the supported list. I think that's obviously a nice benefit. As for like next steps, I know there's some of us at Red Hat who had the experience with some cryo capabilities in production that I know will want to work with you, but I think we're all interested in at least pushing phase 1 and 2 forward.
Right. I think Manuel and not sure.
I think Mernal and Giuseppe are probably who.
Yeah, we worked together last year on the initial version of this cap, and I think Manuel was approver. Not sure if someone else was it, but Manuel, do you have time to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Giuseppe and I will work with you. Yeah.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Feel free to ping me on some of that stuff too. We did a lot of cuss stuff a few years ago at Circle, and that would be useful for some stuff at VMware too.
Oh, great. Can you share your GitHub or Slack handle on the chat?
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's all for the topic of user namespaces. Let's move on to in-place pod vertical scaling. Vinay.
Hi. Sorry, my apologies. I have not been able to. Once I lost momentum on this late in the last release, I never got it back. But I spent the last couple of weeks just catching up on the code and looking through some of the key feedback that we have that needed to be addressed. I think the major ones was from Lantau and one from you. and I've pinged Lantau. I think I was looking to see how we can instrument the plug to when the resize is in progress for a pod. It should, call get pod status and get the latest from the CRI and then update its cache. The problem is that even if we did that, it's not helping because if there is a series of updates, let's say the memory is being updated and the CPU is being updated, we break it down so that we are not exceeding the pod limits that's been approved by the FIT when we admit the resize. So we do memory first and then we do the CPU. But if we have already successfully updated the memory and we don't have the latest from get pod status, then the problem is that we'll be writing back the previous memory values, which keeps bouncing, toggling back and forth. So the code that I currently have there in the update container, after calling update container resources for a resource type, we call get pod status and then update the cache. I think that needs to stay. So I just wanted Lantau to take a look at that code. I did make the change to define a separate resource. We were using V1 resource type in the container resources container status that we have for the kube container status. I changed that. When we query back when we get something from the CRI, we get either Windows or Linux container resources. I translate them to just resources, resource quantity, and then keep them there. And then this gets converted when it's used before we check if we need to do update. And the other side is on kube pods when we are generating the API container status. So that's one of the comments that you had. I looked at that function and it is pretty much looking at what's currently there and storing the best available information into the container status for the API, what the user sees. So I was wondering if you and Lantau would have some time to take a look at this this week so that we can see if there are any more changes needed to be done.
I will do my best. I don't know if I will have a chance to be able to review it thoroughly. I've got a lot on my plate right now. Lantau, do you know if you'll be able to look at this one?
Yeah, I think I can take a look as soon as possible. I'm not sure whether I can get time this week, but at least early next week, I think.
Okay, sure. I think yeah, we can do that. I'll focus on the scheduler. I think Jashin from ByteDance is helping me with the scheduler side of things. I'm going to follow up with him. There is some non-trivial work to be done over there, so I'll fix it on that. Make sure that gets done so that the PR is ready to merge before we'll target to merge it before the code freeze happens. And Alana, I think Wangchen might need some help from you to figure out how to run the E2E test that we have with the feature gate enabled. You mentioned in one of the comments that you had was that the test should be checked in with feature gate enabled. Right now, if the feature gate is disabled and the tests are run, the test will respond.
There is an alpha test job that runs everything with it'll turn on all alpha feature gates. So that should be picking it up, but I think that you may have had a selector in your test that was causing it to not get picked up by that job. So I don't think there's anything particularly special about this that needs special infrastructure to run. But if you wrote the tests as node end-to-end tests as opposed to just like standard core end-to-end tests, then they won't get picked up by those jobs. But from what I can see here, they look like standard end-to-end tests. So they should get picked up. It just depends on what test selector that you put on them.
Oh, okay. So the test selector, I think it's okay. Well, let me.
I think that there isn't one at all, which is part of the problem. I couldn't find the test running anywhere. Like a lot of these tests look like unit tests.
These are E2E test. We're looking at the test in pod E2E.
Yeah, so we need to ensure that they're actually running as part of the E2E suite, and I don't think that they're actually getting like picked up with the Jinko framework from what I can see. There's a bunch of cases that are like unit test style matrix ones, but I don't see where the test actually gets set up with the name.
So if I'm understanding right,
we shouldn't do like a live review of your thing on the call. I'm just saying that was the thing that I pointed out previously.
Okay, so I have come in. I think what will help is if we can get the selector. What we should, I think what you're referring to is in sig describe. In the description, we need to add a new.
Yeah, I don't see that there's a sig description on there at all for sig node. So
sig describe is there. I think I'll ask her to add it.
Okay.
There is sig node on it. It's been changed in the last code. It just says slow. So I'm wondering if we should have sig node.
No, it has to have a name describing what the test does so that we can like find it in the end-to-end test suite. That's what I'm referring to as like a test selector.
Okay, I'll catch up with this. Let's review this offline. I'll ping you on Slack.
Okay. I don't think we have anything else on that. So let's move on to the container forensic checkpointing. Adrian.
Yeah, hi. So I put it on the agenda last week, but I wasn't able to make it to the meeting, and I saw it was discussed during the meeting, and there were two questions, and I just wanted to answer them here. One of the questions was if the whole cap is, if this enables only forensic container checkpointing, or if this also allows in the future to implement things like migration or container migration. And I just wanted to say that, yes, of course, it enables everything around, or it's possible to use this as a base to enable everything around checkpointing, restoring, migration, if this is wanted. But we wanted to just focus on one single use case for the checkpoint feature to make it easy to review. This was the main goal. That's why we only talk about forensic container checkpointing, but it doesn't block us in the future to do anything more complicated, more I don't know, more advanced with checkpoint restore. And the other question was about I didn't understand it correctly from the meeting notes. It was about how networking storage is connected with containers, and I try to answer it here and in the cap pull request that basically all external resources the container is using has to exist before the container can be restored. That's all I wanted to basically resolve the open questions from last week. That's it from my side.
Hi, Adrian. This is Kathy. I post some more comments in the PR. Could you take a look?
Oh yeah, I saw that you posted, but I hadn't read them. I will read them and answer them on GitHub. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So for the other question regarding the outstanding, the outstanding questions about how networking storage will work on restore. Yeah, I didn't post those questions, but I have the same question, because when you if you would like to restore the container from the checkpoint, right? If you would like to run that properly on another server, on another node, then there's some uniqueness issue that need to be taken care of, like some networking issue. I guess that's the same. That's what those questions mean. So have you thought about that? So I think the point is, if I just checkpointing the containers, probably is not enough for a restoration on another, to work properly on another node.
Yeah. So this So this sounds like one of the questions I often get about checkpoint restore is about networking. So the thing is, if there are established, so talking about TCP connections, because that's most of the time the most difficult thing. If there are established TCP connections, we can migrate a container, but we need to have the same IP address inside the container or where the socket is bound to. So we need to have the same IP address in the container as during checkpointing if we want to enable restoring with with established TCP connections. I think most of the time this is not really useful if the TCP connections is going to the outside. But if the TCP connections is between containers in the same pod, then they can be migrated. But then again, it's internal. If it's external, I think it would make more sense, which is also supported by the checkpoint restore tool. We can say, just close all open TCP connections on checkpoint restore. And if we are at a point where we decide we want to migrate a container, we accept that the client has to re-establish the TCP connections. So TCP is most of the time the thing where most questions are asked, because established TCP connections are possible to restore, but because the IP addresses have to stay the same, it's not always really doable. If you have a elaborate networking setup, then maybe you cannot have the same IP address. Is this something which answers your questions a bit, or is this the complete wrong direction?
Yeah, I think it answers the question a bit. I'm thinking about another usage scenario, not migration, because I think it's very useful. For example, if we would like to create another container, another container on another node from that checkpoint image, it's not migration. We would like to create a new container instance, okay, because of scalability request. Then we don't want any, so we want there's some unique numbers in the existing container, right? When you do the checkpoint. But those are not portable across the nodes. So how we resolve that? I think that's
okay. So yeah, that's an interesting question, and we are already discussing this upstream. There's the same request is coming from Amazon during virtual machine migration, basically. So if you have some, like you said, unique numbers which create random numbers, and if you do a checkpoint from the container and then create multiple copies of the containers, from this point on, they all have been seeded, all the containers with the same random seed, and so the random numbers will be the same. So there is a discussion currently going on the Linux kernel level. How can we tell a virtual machine which is migrated, or how can we tell a process or a container that is migrated that it has been migrated and that it has to, I don't know, reseed its random number generators and maybe drop its secrets so that it's no longer in memory, that it needs to recreate keys, things like that. And the problem is there is currently no solution. Either there was a proposed patch on the Linux kernel which was not accepted. Then there's currently a discussion to include it in systemd, but the problem is with systemd that it's not always available in containers. So currently no one has a good idea how to tell a VM or a process that it has been migrated in a way that it's usable for everyone. So we would like to have an interface to tell processes that they have been migrated, or even virtual machines, but there is currently nothing which does this. There was a discussion about this on Linux Plumbers conference a few weeks ago. There's even a video if you want to check it out.
Yeah. I actually, there's a paper on that. I read that already. Yeah. So that's just that solves the random numbers unique. I mean, okay, I didn't know those patches were not accepted by Linux kernel. But even they were accepted, there are other problems too. But I would not like to discuss this into detail in this meeting.
Okay.
But I think
I will look at your comments on GitHub and try to answer them there, and then we can continue this discussion there, definitely.
Okay, yeah, I think that's good. Yeah. Actually, another question is, like if we use container D, right? So it's not everything is loaded into the memory. So I'm not sure that when you take the checkpoint of the container, do you also checkpoint those files on the disk, or you just checkpoint the memory?
Yes. So my work is based on my work on. So I did this all for Podman, and I brought this all to CRI-O, and the Podman and CRI-O checkpoints are including the differences of the file system. So this needs to be implemented for container D also. So, but no one has done it so far. But yeah, we include it in the checkpointing I have done so far. We take the diff from the latest read-write layer and store it in the checkpoint. We take all changed files. We take all dumped processes and use it to restore the container. So this is solved, but container D needs to also implement it if they want the same feature, basically.
Oh, okay. So your implementation is also in the PR? Is I mean the
there are this is going on for a long time. There are a lot of PRs all around, and but there's a PR for Kubernetes. There's a big draft PR for Kubernetes, which implements it basically end to end for the drain use case. So you say kubectl drain, and on restart, all containers are restored. And then there are CRI-O patches, there are CRI control patches. So everything exists, but and it's all linked, but it's all in draft states because I'm waiting for the CRI API changes, which this CAP tries to implement. As long as they are not approved, I cannot do the changes in CRI-O and all the other projects as long as the CRI API is not updated.
Okay, thanks. Okay. If you can post the PR you just mentioned, you say
if you go through the history of the CAP, you should find it all there.
I think it would be great if we could add it to the notes for the context if people maybe watching the recording.
Okay, yeah,
okay,
that sounds great. Thank you.
I will try to add them all there, of course. Good idea. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's all we had for that. And that's the end of our list of agenda items for today, unless someone snuck another one on. Nope, doesn't look that way. So do we have any last minute agenda items, or shall we adjourn for today?
I have a question. This is a follow-up on the discussion last meeting. So it's for the Vinay's PR. So is Vinay still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so I remember there was a discussion that you were that PR will be broken up into multiple PRs, so it's easier for people to review. Do you still plan to do that, or you need any help to do that?
I think the PR, most of the PR is already reviewed. So I already rebased and squashed all the changes. Tim Hawken has looked into the API and he's good with what we have. I think the next major thing is for Lanta to look at the node, and there are a couple of changes for Alana and Lanta to look at and see if they make sense on the node side. Scheduler wanted their change is not very big. It looks like there's some more work to be done, and we may, if Jashin wants to create a separate PR, because my change in the scheduler is just like a couple of lines or something, but there's more that needs to come. As long as it is fully ready, it can be broken up into another separate PR. We haven't, there are no plans at this point. By next week, we'll know.
I just looked at it, Vinay, it was one giant commit, at least for myself. If we could get discrete commits, if that wasn't the state now, that would have been really useful. It becomes actually almost impossible to look at in the web interface.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah, I think that I had it broken down into separate commits earlier on, just before, but we missed the last release. And just after that, I think Tim suggested we squash it because it's already all been reviewed except for the specific feedback items that were there.
I don't think that's accurate. Tim was only doing your reviews for API review. He wasn't looking at the node parts. And so typically when you make an API change like this, you have the core API changes and then all the generated changes that come with them. And then your actual like changes to the components to wire up the API stuff and then end-to-end tests. So I would expect to see at least 4 commits in this PR, one for each of those things. So Tim is like only looking at your API changes. He's not looking at the rest. And it is very difficult for us to review the rest of it.
I think that's correct. But there were, for a while, I was maintaining 5 different commits there. And after we came close to reviewing it, we decided, okay, it's good to squash. It's in the comments somewhere. I can find it and share it with you.
I don't agree with that assessment. So I'm not sure. I mean, maybe someone said that. I didn't say that. I don't think the node reviewer said that. So.
Yeah, personally, Vinay, I'll find it very difficult to review your PR, and I was hoping to do that this week. Because last I looked at it, it was almost like 20,000 lines of a diff in a GitHub web interface. And so I have to basically pull it down locally, which I probably will do because I want to run it. But yeah, just it can be difficult.
Yeah, in particular, splitting out those generated changes, anything that touches the pod spec is going to have lots and lots of generated changes that come with it for the test fixtures. Ensuring that at least that's in a separate commit so that people can look at the rest of the code. And often it's also nice to have like the initial changes and then in a separate commit, the generated changes so that we can see, okay, these were the spec changes. Here's all the generated stuff. And then here's the actual code changes. And then potentially end-to-end tests in a separate commit.
Okay, so let me do this. I'll take a look at it tonight to see if I can split it up. I think I still have enough context in my mind to tell which one goes where. Essentially I'll split it into 4 or 5 commits, 4 commits I think at this point. One for the node, one for E2E test, and 2 for the generated. I think there'll be two generated commits, one from the CRI kubelet side, one from the API side. So 5. I'll see if I can split that up. That way we can bring it back so that it's easy for everyone to review. It looks like people want to take another look at this. I squashed it mainly because at some point we said, okay, it's good time to squash it after a lot of review last June, July, but we didn't make that.
That sounds fine. Kathy, do you have, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's I just want to let, we need to know if you need help on breaking that up, just let me know. Yeah, I can help. But if you can do it, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll do it tonight. I think I have enough context on, because previously API kept evolving on top of the kubelet changes, which was making things difficult. Now API is not evolving. So I'll just take all the API changes, put them into, I'll just replace this, what we currently have. I'll force push another one, which will have 4 or 5 commits. I think it should not be more than a couple of hours worth of work, and I can do it tonight.
Okay, thanks. I think that's it for this meeting. So thanks everybody for joining, and I hope to see you next week. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye.